I'll do it. You want me to start over?
I can do it. Anyway, I am awfully excited about the opportunity to share this lesson this morning as we talk about worship. I've mentioned it. I've mentioned it in Sunday school, and I try to really, if any time that Pastor Lonnie asks me to pray, I really try to bring up the point of how important and special worship is. So many times, and we're guilty, having 5 kids, you try to get everybody to church, and it just seems like so many times everything goes just as backwards as it can possibly go, and you just think, wow, I made it here, and you're just checking off the boxes of the things that you got to do, to me, as I've gotten older, and I really think worship and time that we get to worship is very special. Does anybody else need a book?
How'd you like getting 10 kids together at the same time, Jason?
Say what?
That's like get 10 kids.
10 kids would be pretty tough there, Lillian.
That's what Mama used to do. We go washing stuff, put 2 at a time, or washing 2 at a time. That's the good old days.
I understand. 5 was hard enough. The opportunity that we have to worship is a really special thing. And I was excited when I saw what our quarter was about, because I'm excited to try to share with all of us how important and special and that worship can be. And so I'm excited about this lesson this morning, and when you look at it, the inspiration for worship. If you read in our book there, sometimes I stay with the book, sometimes I get way away, but it talks about that, most of us were taught at an early age to be grateful and to thank people when they do stuff for us. I mean, is that not I know Felicia and I form heart on the kids if you thank people when they do things for you. And I know my mom and dad done the same to me, that if when people do things for you, that you thank them. And in our society, that's something that wasn't just that happened to me, but I think I seen everybody in here, their heads were nodding when I mentioned that we're taught to thank people that do things for us. I remember very vividly, after I graduated high school, my mama staying on my butt about writing thank you letters for people does anybody else remember those days? And
I found some letters the other day when I was in college, and Mother wrote to me and said, April, write a thank you note to the other. You're getting behind.
But I got the same letter. That's so funny. My mama write me letters in college. Did you thank so and so for what they did? Did you thank Mama and Papa? It goes back to that. And then here I'm. I see the other side of it now, because Felicia and I are on the boys. They graduate and they did you write your thank you note yet? And no. Have you wrote your and but it kind of cements the whole point of our lesson this morning, is this idea of things are given or done for us, and when they are, we give thanks to it. We do that very, I'm going to say, it is ingrained in our society to do to the people that do things for us here. And so when we tie it to this idea of worship, essentially that's what worship is that we're giving thanks to God for what He does for us every day. And that's what worship is. It's a time to gather together, to set aside a moment to thank God for all He's done for us. church has really changed for me because once I started thinking about worship in that way. I am excited to get to come here. I am excited that for that 2 hours. Now, sometimes it's really hard to get here, and sometimes there's lots of things that get in the way. But then once I walk in the doors, I am excited that we get to worship together. And I want that excitement to go to each of us. Because that is what worship is. It's a time that we can gather together and thank God for what He's done in our lives, what He's done for us. And that's what our lesson is in a nutshell this morning, is realizing that's what worship is.
There's a song about that too. What He's done for others, He'll do for you too.
Exactly, Billy.
I got that song somewhere.
Exactly right. As a discussion starter this morning, our question says, as a kid, who encouraged you to be the best you could be?
My dad.
Your
Dad
dad
was
did that?
always there for us. When Mama left us, Dad was there for us.
That's awesome. Anybody else want to share? As a kid, who encouraged you to be the best you could be?
Mom and Dad.
Mom and Dad?
Mom and Dad. And my brother did too. Jackie did too. Jackie's always there for us. And always coming to see us on Christmas and Easter and holidays and so forth. He stayed with us 3 years.
School teachers, they're very important part of that.
I think so too, Jen.
But also your Sunday school teachers and your minister. As a kid growing up, that meant a lot for me.
That's great. Anybody else?
Grandparents.
Grandparents, for sure.
Dad wouldn't let us go to church.
We slipped off.
We had to sneak off. He wouldn't let us go to ball games.
I didn't worry on no ball
He's
games
afraid
myself,
we'd get
because I
hurt.
don't watch ball games. I probably went to the races if I would've.
That's great. Thank you.
And,
You know,
I know who looked after me too, Jason. Lady Mae and James. We're gonna took off. She about near raised me.
that's pretty neat. We've got people in our lives. I know for me personally, as soon as I read this question, there was one person that came to my mind. Obviously, yes, your mom and dad and your grandparents, but my uncle Steve, that passed away, but he was my middle school. You know, he taught school in middle school, and he was the PE teacher, and then. But I know I've shared his story many times, but you know, he was one that he would always, "You're awesome." That was how that's how he hugged you. He said, "Jason, you're awesome." A lot of times I didn't feel awesome. I felt backwards and I felt lost, but he would always. That's how he greeted everybody, and that's always stuck with me. I really, really try to do it with all our kids here. In Bible school, and that little reminder that somebody thought enough of me to grab me and hug me hard and say, "You're awesome." That's always stuck with me. I want to share a converse story to that. Now, I had the greatest mom and dad that ever was, and I love them. But I'll never forget. I wrestled all my freshman year, and Daddy, he never thought a whole lot of sports or anything. And he never went to a match. And then my sophomore year, my first match, my sophomore year, I wrestled a 3-time state champion, Darrell Eldridge from Carter. He beat me 3-2. And I was proud as I could be. That was the only match that he ever come to. I got off the mat, and he said, "Boy, if you can't do no better than that, I just quit." He said, that boy had you on your back the whole time.
I said, "I know what I'm good at. I'm good at bowling."
That's great.
Me too. That's what we do at Generation.
But
Go.
I ain't good at playing pool too.
When I share that little story, and again, I had the greatest parents there ever was, But there's two converses right there, right? You know, Daddy, that wasn't important to him, and he come and you know, those two things always stuck with me. One, my Uncle Steve that always said, you know, you're awesome, and then Dad doing that. Now, with all the other great things Daddy did, and he encouraged and everything else, but those kind of things stick with you a long time, don't they? You know, I share that because you see, when we come together to worship a God that is always telling us that He's with us, He's always telling us that I'm awesome. Exactly right. And, you know, that's worthy of our worship. That's worthy of our praise. And so, anyway, I think this is a pretty neat discussion starter as we get into the heart of our lesson this morning. We're going to be looking at Psalms chapter 25, and verses 4 through 15 are the verses that we're going to be reading this morning. So let's go ahead and get right into our verses. Psalms chapter 25, verses 4 through 7. And verse 4 says, "Show me thy ways, O Lord, teach me thy paths. Lead me in thy truth, and teach me, for thou art the God of my salvation. On thee do I wait all the day. Remember, O Lord, thy tender mercies and thy loving kindness, for they have been ever of old. Remember not the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions. According to thy mercy, remember thou me for thy goodness' sake, O Lord." And so the psalmist, as I was preparing and thinking about these verses, you know, I really thought about contributing them and thinking of David as the author of these verses. And to me, that kind of changed the way of what these verses say. As I say that, who was David?
He was the king of Israel.
He's the king of Israel. That's one. Who else was he?
Shepherd boy.
He's a shepherd boy. What else was David? Who else was David? He's a warrior too, right?
Defeated Goliath.
Defeated Goliath, and not only that, but he had lots and lots of battles that he led the armies into. You know, I bring that up because, you know, I make an excuse sometimes. The excuse I make is I'm too busy to sit and thank God for all He's done. Anybody else? Lord, one of these days I'm going to have time to sit down and really thank you. Am I the only person that does that? I hope I'm not.
Quickly
Thank
say
him
thank you for
constantly
everything.
all day.
Say that again.
You can thank him all day, but you don't have to have a certain time.
No.
Because I thank him, I'll just look out the window and I see something I want to thank him for. The birds and the trees and all the beauty that he has given us that we, like this one woman said, that when she lost everything, she said it's the little things. She said that she missed like a certain cup of coffee of a morning. And it's the little things.
Absolutely.
Just look around us and think what you would really miss.
That's a great point, Chloe.
Yesterday, we got ready for the birthday party. Manuel said, Lillian said, well, honor, Lady of Honor Day, she said she's gonna say the blessing, she said, y'all bow your head. Well, I did, I prayed for him yesterday.
That's awesome, Lily. You know, I think Chloe's brought up a great point. That so many times, like me, I think, oh, when I get the time, I'm really going to devote some time to studying, to growing closer to, and you know, we can thank God anytime. We can worship anytime. And I think that's an important part of when we talk about this idea is that God's goodness and love lead us to worship Him, we don't necessarily have to only do it on Sunday mornings when we're here. We don't necessarily only, everything doesn't have to be perfect in order to worship it and thank God for what He's done for us. I think that's an important part. I bring that up because I bring the idea of who David was also because, I don't know about any of y'all, and I know I think differently sometimes, but, I think about all that David had to do. Would we all agree that David probably had a pretty full plate? I mean, I think of that. I think David had a pretty full plate, whether it was when he was a warrior or whether it was when he was the king. He had a lot of things going on. He had a lot of people wanting a part of him and wanting a part of his time. And yet, we see these Psalms as an example of David taking time out of all the other things that he was being pulled against to actually thank God, to actually worship Him.
Jason, it could have been he didn't take time out. That might have been his first instinct, was automatically thank God. I have gotten to that point in my life without even thinking about it. It's the first thing that comes out of my mouth. Thank you, Jesus.
That's spot on.
An attitude of gratitude.
That's spot on. And, to help me get to what Carlotta's talking about, I think verses like this and thinking of David in that way does help me to get there. Because, see, I make a lot of excuses. Lord, I've got all this to do. I've got X, Y, Z. Well, I need to start at A sometimes, right? And I've got all these things to do, and then when I get all this done, then I'll take the time to thank you. But
Thank Him for what you have to do.
exactly right. But there again, circling all the way back around, the reason I bring this all up is because I am pretty darn sure that David had more to do than I do. Is that a fair statement? I mean, I'm pretty darn sure that as the king of Israel, David probably had more responsibilities than Jason Joyce.
And he didn't have all the conveniences we had to make it faster.
Exactly.
I mean, it took him a long time to travel.
Exactly right, Lonnie. And yet, he took the time to write a psalm like this. He took the time to thank God, just as Carlotta was talking about, and Janet, amen. This idea of at the beginning of the day, at the start of the day, that was the priority. I think this is a beautiful example when you really look at it in that way. At least it really hit me. I don't know if it does y'all, but it really hit me. Because, again, I wake up in the morning and the first thought that's on my mind is, what do I have to accomplish today? And I'm sure David's list was way longer than mine was. But yet, he started, or we take it, we can look at this psalm and say that him sitting down and penning the psalms, thanking God, was an important thing that he had to do. Anyway, I want to throw that out as we get started. As we delve into these verses, as we delve into this idea of God's goodness and love lead us to worship Him, we're going to start out in verse 4. David asked that God will show me thy ways, O Lord, and teach me thy paths. And so, immediately as I read these verses, I'm thinking, how does God show me His ways? This is a hard one.
Holy Spirit.
Spirit leads us, I think, for sure.
Reading the Word.
Exactly right, David. I think being in God's Word shows us the way.
I think God puts the right people on our path.
That's a great one too, Andy. I think that's spot on.
Well, for one thing, he asked God to show him his ways.
How many of us do that?
I do, all the time.
Well, Carl,
I'd be totally lost. I would be totally lost.
I think that's excellent, but I think that is something that we forget. That I say we. I know that I forget. A lot of times I thank God for His blessings. I thank Him for what He's done for me that day. I thank Him for the opportunity to start a new day. But a lot of times I forget to ask Him to show me His
I
way.
feel like,
Show me what He wants me to do.
Jason, I feel like when you do that, you're not only honoring God, but you're changing your frame of mind.
Oh, absolutely.
You're helping, like you're talking about all the negative things that you have to deal with. But it's just almost like when you start doing that, that puts you in a different frame of mind. And it's amazing if you can get that kind of mindset, how differently things progress and turn out. And it's amazing.
That's true. Yes,
It's spot on.
And Jason, I've noticed also when I stop asking God to show me His ways and try to do things my ways, I always go back to God, show me your way, because my ways don't always end well.
Daniel, I think that's a very, very valid point, and it is you. As we kind of veer into a different path, but I think it's so true that if we can get ourselves into a pattern of worship, a pattern of starting the day with worship, I think everyone in here that's ever tried to pursue that can truly say that it makes a difference in your life, in your day. But then it's just like so many things when we let ourselves get in the way, and you can miss a couple of days, and then a couple of days turn into a couple of weeks, and then a couple of weeks can turn into a couple of months. And then you start saying, wow, it just ain't going as smoothly. Things don't seem to be working the way that they did. And then we can actually look back to when we were starting our day and the difference it made. I think any of us that have tried that pursuit can, to some degree, see exactly what you're talking about. Our next group of verses, or verse 5 says, I'm sorry, not the next group, but verse 5 says, not only did David, he starts by asking God to show me thy ways, asking, O Lord, teach me thy paths. And then he says, lead me in thy truth and teach me, for thou art the God of my salvation. On thee do I wait all the day. See, verse 5 starts tying it all together right there in the second verse. He asked God to show him his ways. He asked God to teach me thy paths. He asked God to lead me in thy truth and teach me. And then he says, for thou art the God of my salvation. On thee do I wait all the day. You see, David is recognizing something. He's saying, Lord, I am willing to follow your ways. I'm willing to follow your paths. I'm willing to let you lead me, for thou art the God of my salvation. The point I want to try to pull from that is, I don't want to follow somebody that's not true. I don't want to follow somebody that maybe their ways aren't right or their path isn't right. But yet, because God, the reason that I will follow his ways and I will follow his paths and I will let him lead me and teach me is because he is the God of my what?
Salvation.
Salvation. Does that kind of make sense?
That too, and in that verse with the wait all the day, he is waiting, he's patient, waiting on God.
Absolutely.
Instead of in his own time, he's waiting on God.
Oh, that's a wonderful point. And you see, because God is the God of my salvation, as a Christian, I believe that. I think all of us in here will say, the reason I am saved is because of of Jesus and Christ and what he did for me is the only way that I have that promise of salvation. And because of that, because he is the God of my salvation, then I will let him show me his ways. And I will let him teach me his past. And I will let him lead me. And I will let him teach me because of who he is. And then the end of verse 5, and it says, and I will wait all day, if necessary, for you to do that, God. That's an important part. Patience. Because you see, sometimes that path doesn't become clear that day, does it? Sometimes that path doesn't become clear that week, that month, that year. But Lord, I'm going to wait, and I'm going to keep allowing you to teach me and allowing you to lead me and allowing you to show me, because I believe that path will be revealed at some point in time. And I am going to wait on that. And that is so against everything I am, right? It ain't just me, I know. Because you see, when I pray for something, or I'm sitting there and I'm spending my time with God in the morning, and I say, Lord, boy, I'm 5 o'clock, I'm needing to answer. You know, I mean, I'm just being real. That's how my mind works. Okay, Lord, I prayed about it today and it doesn't happen. What's the deal?
We're about to pray for patience now.
Yeah.
She said pray for patience now.
That's classic. But we do that, don't we? It ain't just me, I hope. But we do that. Just April's spot on. We fall guilty of that, but we see that David says, I'll wait all day. Lord, I'm going to worship you. But if it don't happen today, it don't happen today. I'm going to keep worshiping you. And if it don't happen tomorrow, I'm going to patiently wait. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful picture there in verse 5. Verse 6 says, remember, O Lord, thy tender mercies and thy loving kindness, for they have been ever of old. David is saying, Lord, and when you look in, obviously from our material, you talk about this idea of loving kindness. It's the Hebrew word, if you read in our books, for hesed. And this word hesed, we read this loving kindness, but there's so much to it. I want to share this with y'all because I think it's pretty cool. If you look in our book, or in my book anyway, it says this word represents loving kindness. This word represents the important Hebrew term hesed, which has so many shades of meaning that an English word can't adequately express it. And so it says that it means loving kindness. It means steadfast love. It means mercy. It means grace. It means loyalty. It means love. And so in this one word hesed, it wraps up all these different terms. And so David is saying, Lord, you are the God of mercies, and this hesed, this loving kindness, this grace, mercy, love, loyalty, that's who you are, God. And throughout history, we see that's who God is. It is because of this word hesed that God loved us so much that he would willingly give his son to us. That's who God is. I don't want to get into my Men's Day talk too much, but what was laid on my heart on Men's to share with you this morning is this idea, is that since the beginning of time, God is what? He's love. Since the very, very, very first breath, since in the beginning God said, let there be light, it was love that he was. That's who he is, this hesed, if you will, from our lesson. Because God is love, and his love is that way, he is worthy of our worship. When we talk about this idea of being excited to come and worship God, I'm excited to come and worship every Sunday and be a part of this because God is love. That's who He is. That's inherent to His being. Is this love. And David in verse 6 says, O Lord, thy tender mercies, thy loving kindness. And David refers to that. He says, for they have been ever of old. From the very beginning, David acknowledges, God, that's who you are. You are love. And then David goes on to say, in verse 7, he says, remember not the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions. According to thy mercy, remember thou me for thy goodness' sake, O Lord. See, verses 6 and 7, there's a contrast, right? David says in verse 6, remember, but then in verse 7, he says, remember what? Remember not. Do you see the contrast? He says, God, you are love. Help me to remember that you are love. Help me every morning, every day, to remember that you are this Hesed. And Lord, please remember not who I am. Remember not the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions. According to thy mercy, remember thou me for thy goodness' sake. You see, if you really look at verses 6 and 7, because God is love and has been love since the very, very beginning, then because He is that, He doesn't remember our transgressions. And that is like, wow. Okay? Really think about verses 6 and 7, because it is really like, wow. Because you see, as human beings, our memories tend to be very long, don't they? If somebody transgresses against me, what do? April says you try to get them back.
You don't forget it.
You don't forget it. Now, am I being truthful in saying these things? If somebody transgresses against me, my first instinct is, I'm saying my first instinct, okay? Y'all with me, okay? Our first instinct as a human being, if somebody transgresses against me, is to get them back. Is that a true statement? I don't have much science to back that on other than myself and what I had witnessed and talked to people and everything else.
Sinful nature.
But it is. But you see, God is love, if we see in verse 6. He is the Hesed. He is steadfast, mercy, grace, loyalty, love. That's who God is. And He remembers not the sins of my youth. He remembers not my transgression. When we think of God as love, and that's the definition or not but the example that David has given us in here, truly that is love, right? Truly that is love. When it doesn't matter what I have done, He loves me anyway. He doesn't remember my transgressions. He doesn't remember what I've done wrong. He just loves me for who I am. He loves me because He is love. And David is saying in verses 6 and 7, therefore, God, you are worthy of my worship because of that. Because it goes completely against who we are. Is there any discussion on verses 4 through 7?
Love came down at Christmas and love rose to Easter.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Our question, I love the questions this week. The question under these verses says, where do you see evidence in the world today of God's goodness?
Everywhere.
And I'm glad you do. And I think that's great.
But you don't have to worship. You don't have to go to church to worship God. You can worship God anywhere. Your car, at home, your at work, anywhere.
Exactly right, dude.
Yeah, when we was out, Jason, I prayed for him that he kept the headaches off of me, so I wouldn't have to go back to ER.
That is great.
And I hadn't been to ER now this week,
That's great news.
and I don't wanna go back there.
In our world today, where other places do we see evidence today of God's goodness?
Jason, I see God's goodness there just about every Wednesday when we get a truckload of supplies for downstairs for the pantry.
Absolutely. What a great example, man.
Then I see him when I go to Generation every 5 days a week.
And I think that's great. And I'm so thankful that there's people there that show you that. That's incredible.
For me, it's when I wake up every morning, I see God's goodness right there. He woke me up that next day.
Oh,
That young one couldn't read a word, and she couldn't write a word. Well, she started going to Generations, now she can read and write.
That's awesome.
That's good.
That is.
I wish Brittany could read a book.
We often ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people? But when you reverse that question, why do good things that happen to bad people? And we see it happen all the time. That's God's love trying to, it's shown equally. Rain falls on everybody. And I think that's an example of God's love.
Exactly right. What a great point. Anything else on the first group of verses? All right. Going to verses 8 through 11 and just continuing right along in the Psalms. Verse 8 says, "Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore will he teach sinners in the way. The meek will he guide in judgment, and the meek will he teach his way. All the paths of the Lord are mercy and truth unto such as keep his covenant and his testimonies. For thy name's sake, O Lord, pardon mine iniquity, for it is great." So David goes on to say, "Good and upright is the Lord, therefore will he teach sinners in the way." Okay, so verse 8 is just a continuation of what we were just talking about. That the idea of David saying, "Remember not my transgressions," God, and then verse 8, he says, "Good and upright is the Lord, therefore will he teach sinners in the way." And it almost goes to tie exactly to what Lonnie just said. You see, it doesn't matter what I've done, does it? God loves me anyway. And he's more than willing, and his arms are wide open to continue to teach me. And to continue to be there for me. And to continue. And, that is like mind-blowing. That's life-changing. Because it gives us the strength to keep going. I sit there and I gave an example about my dad, and I want to share another one. When I was in the 11th grade, I was a junior marshal. And because you was a junior marshal, you got to take your exams with the seniors. Because, you had to be a part of graduation. And so, my final exams that particular day, this particular day I'm going to talk about, I had a pre-calculus exam, and then I had a German 1 exam. Well, I'd spent all my time studying for the pre-calculus, and I hadn't even looked at the German stuff, because that didn't mean a whole lot. That was just something you had to have. And so I made me a little note of stuff I wanted to look over at lunch after I'd taken my pre-calculus exam. And so anyway, I took my math exam, had lunch, and instead of looking over my study notes, I kind of hung out with a bunch of my buddies and blowed it off. Probably ain't the only one that's ever done that, but that's what I did. And so I went to go take this German exam, and I was the only one taking it early, and so the teacher sent me to the library by myself. Well, I had that study notes in my back pocket. And I thought, well, I ain't got to worry about the German exam. So I pulled that paper out from my back pocket, and I slid it under my test. And then I thought, you idiot. I said, it's just stupid German. I said, you know, whatever I get's what I get. And so I just took the test, wadded up that piece of paper, threw it in the trash can, and, you know, went on, left school. Next morning I showed up to school, they called me to the principal's office. Wasn't the only time, unfortunately, but I knew it was never good when you got called to the principal's office. Go in there and there's a German teacher. He said, Jason, you cheated on that exam. Still to this day I have no idea. But anyway, he said, you cheated on that exam. And principal's there, and I said, buddy, look, I said, I ain't gonna lie, I had a cheat in my pocket. And I said, I pulled it out, but I never looked at it. And he says, well, you know, blah, blah, who's to say you ain't cheated on everything here? Well, they're going to kick me off the junior marshal board. And they're going to, well, they called Dad. Daddy comes storming in the door. He said, let me tell you something. My boy didn't say he cheated. He didn't cheat. That's what he told him. And anyway, the German teacher kind of got smart. And he's like, you know, who's to say he ain't cheated all the way through high school? That's what his comment was. And boy, Daddy and him got into it a little bit. And so I said, look, I said, just give me the test right now. I'll take it again right now. I said, I swear I didn't cheat on it. And so anyway, that's what they let me do. I took it again right there in the principal's office, and I made like 2 points higher. And anyway, I share that little story because, you see, I always knew Daddy had my back that way. I always knew it. I never doubted. How did that change my life? Now, sometimes I was wrong. I got called to the principal's office for other things, and I got in a lot of trouble when I got home. Sometimes I was very wrong. But yet, when Daddy said, did I cheat? And I looked at him and I said, no, sir. And then he turned around and said, my boy said he didn't cheat. He didn't cheat. How did that make a difference in my life? Knowing my daddy had my back that way.
Encouragement.
Say what, Gail?
Encouragement.
Absolutely. And Chloe said he had faith in me. You see, the reason I bring this little story up is because in verse 8, David says, good and upright is the Lord, therefore will he teach who?
Sinners.
Sinners in the way. You know, it didn't say God will teach the perfect in the way. It didn't say that God will teach you when everything is, when you've got it all together, then God will teach you. That ain't what David's saying here, is he? He's saying that God will teach the sinners in the way. And it's the same thing as my dad having my back. By gosh, I was wrong a lot. But yet Daddy still was there. Even those times when I got called to the principal's office and I deserved it, guess what? He still loved me. He was still there for me. I'll never forget when that little story kind of, but I remember one day sitting and thinking, you know, I was really worried about a grade. And I got thinking, you know, why am I so worried about this? Mom and Daddy's going to love me no matter what I make on this test. It don't matter. And I'll never forget thinking that. I'll never forget the difference that made in my life as I left my room. I don't remember how old I was, but I remember realizing that point, I was 10 or 11 years old, that Mom and Daddy was going to love me. It didn't matter if I done good or if I done bad. They was still going to love me, and I could always count on that.
We need to have that same train of thought with God.
Absolutely.
He's going to love us no matter what.
Absolutely. And he does love us no matter what. And so David is, in verse 8, he's making light of that point. He's making us aware of that point. Is that good and upright is the Lord, therefore will he teach sinners in the way. He's there for us. He loves us no matter how many times I fail. He still loves me. Now, how does that change our life by knowing that fact?
Makes us feel worthy.
Makes us feel worthy.
It comforts us.
It comforts us. What else does it do? Encourages. I think it gives us confidence.
Mm-hmm.
I think it gives us confidence to go out and walk out my door that day. Because, you know, I'm going to go out and I'm going to make decisions, and I'm going to do things, and sometimes they're really good, and sometimes they're really bad. But it doesn't matter, because God is going to teach me, and He's going to be there for me either way. That gives us confidence. It's just like my dad doing what he done for me. It gave me the confidence to go out, because sometimes I was going to do things that were really good, and sometimes I was going to do things that were really bad, but it gave me the confidence to go and live my life. And that's what God does for us. Now, is that worth worshiping Him for? I think absolutely. When we go and we tie this idea of worship into thanking God for who He is and what He's done for us, absolutely. To me, that's monumental. It goes on in verse 9 to say, the meek will He guide in judgment, and the meek will He teach His way. And He says, all the paths of the Lord are mercy and truth unto such as keep His covenant and His testimonies. For thy name's sake, O Lord, pardon mine iniquity, for it is great. And then I want to just read our last group of verses 12 through 15. And verse 12 says, what man is he that feareth the Lord? Him shall He teach in the way that he shall choose. His soul shall dwell at ease, and his seed shall inherit the earth. The secret of the Lord is with them that fear Him, and He will show them His covenant. Mine eyes are ever toward the Lord, for He shall pluck my feet out of the net. And so in conclusion of our lesson this morning, we see that David is talking in verses 12 through 15, is this idea of what man is he that feareth the Lord? Him shall He teach in the way that he shall choose. This idea of fearing the Lord, it isn't that, oh, I'm scared of God. It's that I recognize who God is. And so David is saying for those that recognize who God is, that God will teach in the way that He shall choose. And that, I'm going to conclude with that. And that is worth us praising and worshiping Him. Guys, any questions before we close?
I done something really bad one time. I took $10 out of my daddy's pocket, or my daddy whipped me for it. And then after he whipped me, I said, I love you, Daddy. And that's the only time I ever did anything like that.
The one thing that I am thankful for, that God will only teach us in His truth.
Absolutely. Guys, thank y'all so much. Listen, our lesson next week, again this morning, was the inspiration for worship. Next week we're going to be looking at the attitude in worship. And so I look forward to sharing that with you, and hope everybody has a great week. Thank y'all.
Well, they were showing us in Louisiana, taking their airboats out in